Elias Vance was a man who lived by data. As an urban planner for the city of Viridian, his world was a carefully curated matrix of traffic flow models, utility consumption graphs, and demographic projections. His work was quiet, analytical, and, until 6 weeks ago, deeply predictable. He could sit at his desk, surrounded by the holographic projections of his city, and predict with uncanny accuracy where a new bus route would be most efficient, or how a rise in population would strain the water supply. His city was a complex machine, and he was its engineer, a man who believed every problem had a numerical solution. Then came the collapse. It didn't arrive with a bang, but with a series of digital whispers, a coordinated cyberattack later attributed to a group of sophisticated anarchists, targeted the city's autonomous supply chain network. The self-driving trucks, automated warehouses, and digital logistics platforms that had powered Viridian for a decade simply ceased to function. The first sign of trouble was the eerie silence of the delivery drones. Then, the queues at fuel stations began to grow, as the automated pumps refused to dispense. Within 24 hours, the illusion of an effortless, modern life shattered. Elias's carefully constructed world of data became a brutal, lived reality of empty shelves, silent streets, and growing panic. In the ensuing chaos, the military was deployed, not as an occupying force, but as a stabilizing one, tasked with restoring order and coordinating emergency relief. The public initially welcomed them. Soldiers in crisp uniforms brought a sense of purpose and structure to the frantic streets. For the first time in weeks, Elias saw organized lines, coordinated convoys, and a sense of shared purpose. But as the weeks wore on, that structure began to feel less like a temporary solution and more like a permanent, unyielding cage. The cage's chief architect, at least from Elias's perspective, was Captain Marcus Thorne, a man whose jaws seemed perpetually clenched. Thorne was the commander of Sector 7, a sprawling commercial and residential zone that contained Viridian's main hospital and a crucial water treatment plant. Thorne's rules were simple: protocols over people, and security above all else. His most recent protocol, dubbed Fortitude Point, was a heavily fortified checkpoint that controlled the main artery into Sector 7. According to Thorne, it was a necessary measure to prevent looting and ensure only authorized personnel could access the hospital. A team of 20 armed soldiers stood sentry, their faces grim, their focus on a digital manifest of every vehicle and every person entering their sector. On the first day, Elias saw a problem. He had to. His office window offered a direct view of the checkpoint, and from his vantage point, he watched the 6-lane highway narrow into a single, grinding funnel. He saw humanitarian aid trucks, emblazoned with the logos of a dozen different relief agencies, backed up for miles, their drivers slumped over the steering wheels in exhaustion. He started logging the data on his personal terminal, a rogue act in a world where information was now a military asset, its collection and dissemination a tightly controlled operation. The first report he generated was polite, even deferential. It was a simple flow analysis, demonstrating that the Fortitude Point bottleneck was delaying critical aid deliveries by an average of 3 hours. He submitted it through the newly established civilian-military liaison channel, a digital portal that felt more like a black hole. The response, a curt email from a junior officer, stated that operational security takes precedence over non-critical traffic flow. Elias felt a knot tighten in his stomach. The 3-hour delay wasn't non-critical. That was 3 hours of delayed medicine, 3 hours of delayed food, 3 hours of prolonged suffering for people who had already lost everything. His second report was more comprehensive, a magnum opus of frustration and meticulous analysis. He cross-referenced the traffic data with public records of medical supply shortages and anecdotal reports he had discreetly gathered from aid workers. He built a model that showed a direct correlation between the checkpoint's delays and a rising number of hospital admissions for treatable conditions that were deteriorating due to a lack of supplies. He even created a dynamic simulation, a glowing network of red lines and green dots that showed a more efficient checkpoint layout, one that would maintain security while alleviating the bottleneck. He wasn't just complaining, he was offering a solution, a better way forward. This time, the response came from Captain Thorne himself. He summoned Elias to his command post, a makeshift office in the city's central library. The room was a sterile temporary space, dominated by communications, equipment, and tactical maps. Thorne was a mountain of a man, his face a granite mask of discipline. The air in the room was thick with unspoken authority, with the quiet hum of a military machine in motion. "Mr. Vance," Thorne began, his voice a low growl that seemed to vibrate in Elias's chest. I have your models, your simulations. He gestured to a tablet on his desk, its screen showing one of Elias's neat diagrams. Do you think I don't know how to run a checkpoint? I am a soldier. My job is to protect this city from external threats. Your job is to make pretty charts. Elias felt his cheeks flush, but he held his ground. Captain, with all due respect, my charts are based on data, and the data shows that this checkpoint is causing more harm than good. It's a systemic flaw in the protocol itself. The protocol is designed for a military operation, not a humanitarian one. Thorne leaned forward, his eyes narrowing to slits. The system is designed to prevent a total security failure. A few hours of delay is a small price to pay for order and safety. Now, I suggest you stop interfering with military operations. Your civilian data is irrelevant. Do you understand? His tone was final, a steel door slamming shut. Elias understood Thorne's worldview perfectly. Thorne saw the world in black and white, in terms of threats and defenses. He was a professional in a theater of war, and in a war, the mission comes first, always. He was a man of action and command, not of charts and correlations, but Viridian wasn't a war zone, it was a home, and the people in that static line of trucks weren't just cogs in a military machine. They were his neighbors, his family. The system, to Elias, wasn't working. It was failing the very people it was supposed to protect. Unwilling to back down, Elias decided to go a different route. If Thorne refused to see the data, he would have to find a way to make him see the humanity behind it. He began to gather what he called human data. He started with the drivers, a few discreet conversations at the checkpoint, a few bribes of bottled water and prepackaged military rations. He learned that the protocol wasn't just about security, it was also about resource management. Every truck was meticulously catalogued, its contents inventoried and allocated to a specific military-controlled depot. The process was painfully slow, a manual entry system that a single, exhausted clerk struggled to keep up with. He also learned that the soldiers manning the checkpoint were as frustrated as the civilians. They were trained for combat, not bureaucracy, and the endless line of trucks was sapping their morale. Then he met Sergeant Anya, a young, sharp-eyed soldier with a logistics background. Anya saw the same problem as Elias, but from the inside. Elias found her on a quiet shift, away from Thorne's watchful eye. He showed her his data, his models. She looked at them with a look of dawning recognition, a look that mirrored his own. That's it, she whispered, pointing at a graph showing the exponential increase in the processing time per truck. They're trying to use a field ops protocol for a civilian logistics problem. The system is designed to secure a single critical resource like ammunition or fuel, not to process thousands of distinct humanitarian aid deliveries. It's a sledgehammer for a thumbtack. Anya explained the core flaw. The protocol was a secure and hold directive, meant for securing a contested supply point in a hostile environment. It assumed a limited number of incoming assets and a constant threat of enemy engagement. In Viridian, the situation was the opposite. The environment was relatively secure, and the number of incoming assets was overwhelming. The military's own system, designed for efficiency in one context, had become a massive liability in another. It was a classic case of a solution looking for a problem, and in the process, creating a new, far more dangerous one. Armed with this new understanding, Elias went back to his data. He revised his report, adding a new layer of analysis. He didn't just show the problem, he showed the source of the problem. He titled the new report, A Failure of Application, Why Fortitude Point's Protocol is Creating a Public Health Crisis. This time, he didn't use the liaison channel. He found a sympathetic reporter from an underground news outlet that was still operating on a hidden frequency. He sent the report to her, along with the anecdotal evidence he had gathered. Next day, the crisis hit. A critical shipment of insulin, a precious commodity in the city, was delayed by over 6 hours at the Fortitude Point checkpoint. The story broke on the underground news channels. The reporter, who had been briefed by Elias, framed the incident, not as a random delay but as a direct result of a flawed military protocol. She quoted Elias's data, his models, and his conclusion that the military system was a perfect fit for a battle, but a perfect failure for a recovery. The public outcry was immediate and deafening. Citizens, frustrated by weeks of stagnation and inconvenience, suddenly had a name and a face for their collective misery. Fortitude Point. The story went viral on the city's makeshift communication networks. People who had been silently suffering now had a voice. Captain Thorne was summoned to a high-level command meeting. He entered the room expecting to defend his protocol, to cite the security risks he had averted. Instead, he was met with a barrage of questions from his superiors, all of them based on Ilias's data. "Captain Thorne," General Alistair said, his voice a cold steel blade, "we have been informed that your checkpoint protocol has a 12% civilian traffic success rate. Is that correct?" Thorne's mind reeled. He had never calculated a civilian traffic success rate. That wasn't a military metric, it was an urban planning one. "Sir, with all due respect, that metric is a civilian construct. My metrics are based on threat containment and resource security." "And what about the 6-hour delay on the insulin shipment?" "Captain," a high-ranking official from a civilian oversight committee interjected. "That is a humanitarian metric. It is a metric that is causing public disorder. Your protocol, Captain, is becoming a threat to the stability you are tasked to protect." Thorne felt his carefully constructed world crumbling. He had been so focused on executing the plan, on following the rules, that he had never once stopped to ask if the rules were still relevant. He saw a glimmer of Ilias's data in the eyes of his superiors. He saw the cold, hard numbers that he had dismissed as irrelevant civilian charts. The climax arrived not in a flash of gunfire, but in the quiet, decisive moment when General Alistair made a call. "Fortitude Point is to be reconfigured immediately. From now on, a team of civilian experts will work alongside the command in Sector 7 to design more efficient protocols. Captain, you will be their liaison." Thorne felt a profound sense of defeat. He had lost, not to a superior force, but to a civilian armed with nothing more than a spreadsheet and an inconvenient truth. His authority had been challenged and, in the process, a systemic flaw that he could not see from within his own rigid worldview had been exposed. In the aftermath, Elias didn't seek recognition. He didn't want to be a hero, he just wanted his city back. The military's protocols in Sector 7 were changed. A new system was designed, a hybrid of military security and civilian logistics. The bottleneck at Fortitude Point disappeared almost overnight. Humanitarian aid flowed freely again, and the sense of hope, so long stifled, returned to the city. Captain Thorne, in a rare moment of personal reflection, found Elias on the streets one day, observing the new, free-flowing traffic. Thorne's face was still a granite mask, but the eyes behind it were different. They were tired, but they were also, for the first time, seeing something other than threats and defenses. "Vance," he said, his voice flat, "I was trained to defeat an enemy. You were trained to build a city. I couldn't see the enemy was a broken process. Thank you." Elias simply nodded. He didn't need an apology. The traffic, the people, the city moving forward, that was all the vindication he needed. The soldier had been forced to see the civilian's world, and in doing so, had learned a new kind of discipline, the discipline of adaptability. The system had been flawed, but it was not beyond repair, and it was a testament to the fact that sometimes, the greatest courage isn't in following the rules, but in knowing when to challenge them.